for today. Got about 30 minutes or so, a little bit less. It is the argument from the existence of evil. This is one of my favorite ones, and the one I like to use a lot. Because usually evil is seen as the strongest objection to God's existence. People think, why doesn't the biggest objection you'll hear about God's existence? Does God exist? No, why? Evil. We're going to turn this around and show that if evil exists, God must exist. Powerful argument. So, if someone says that God can exist because of evil, here's what we do. Here's how. Let me find the. Okay. Evil assumes at least two things, first of all. One, evil assumes that there is an objective moral standard of good. And assumes, two, that there is teleology to life. So, let's look at the first one. There is a moral standard of good. If I say someone is lying, what am I assuming?
That they're not telling the truth.
Good. So if I say someone is lying, I am assuming there is truth. So I can tell truth without there being any lies. But if lies exist, it automatically assumes there is truth. So a lie is deviating from truth. So a truth could exist without any lies, but a lie cannot exist unless truth exists. Are you with me there? Let's look at that. The argument we just went over. We're going to add one more statement to it to show the argument that we're trying to use here. So, if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties exist. Premise 2 that we just added, well, evil exists. Okay, well, if evil exists, therefore, objective moral values and duties do exist. Conclusion remains the same, therefore, God exists. So, if an atheist wants to say that evil exists, they must first assume an objective standard exists, and that can only exist if God exists. If I say someone is accused of lying, they are accused of deviating from a standard of truth. So a lie can only exist if truth exists. So let's break this down again. If you say someone's doing evil, you're assuming and implying they are deviating from good. And if you're saying good exists, there has to be a standard, like we argued just before, that good and evil can only exist, morality, if something eternal and necessary exists to ground it in. So in reality, Mr. Atheist, if you're going to tell me that God doesn't exist because there's evil, you first have to assume evil is deviating from good. You have to assume good is grounded in something eternal and necessary, and then you have to assume God exists. So you're trying to tell me that evil doesn't exist because God doesn't exist because evil exists, but evil can only exist if God exists. So if you're going to ask me the question, you can't be an atheist. Did you follow that? So, evil exists? Yes. Why? Because good exists. Why does good exist? Something eternal and necessary exists, it's God. So for an atheist to even say God can exist because there's evil, he has to first presuppose that good and evil exist, which presupposes God exists. So, Mr. Atheist, again, you can't be an atheist if you talk about evil. If evil exists, there has to be good. If good exists, there has to be God. Questions on that?
How do they respond to that?
They usually get mad. or they'll just say, well, see, some will bite the bullet and say, well, I don't believe in good and evil. I said, then what's the problem? Who cares if Westboro Baptist goes and pick up somebody? There's no evil, right? It's just your opinion. I mean, you don't get mad when I go to Taco Bell and you go to Burger King, right? So why are you going to get mad when someone, bashes someone else, or when someone does something evil, or when religious people do evil things? What do you care if it's just someone's opinion? You don't get mad at me when I go eat ice cream and you're eating yogurt. There's no right or wrong, it's just your preference. Calm down. But if there is a right or wrong, and if you think there's evil in the world, you can't be an atheist. Why? Because that assumes good, that assumes God. Frank Turek said, the shadows prove the sunshine. Sunshine can exist without shadows, but shadows can only exist if there's a sunshine. Evil can only exist if there's a God. Because God provides the good, humans deviate from the good, then there's evil. So, if evil exists, God must exist. And you just tell me, well, what about the Old Testament? Look how he did this and that. Wait a minute. You're saying God is evil? Yeah. Well, even it can only exist if good exists. And if good exists, God exists. So, if there is evil in the Old Testament, then obviously God exists.
They try to keep them on the same argument.
Certainly. Because they'll run from it.
Yeah.
They'll try to bring up a red herring and get off topic. And I say, well, time out. Does evil exist? No. Then what's your problem? Well, I don't like it. Okay. I don't like the shoes that person's wearing. Does that mean he's not wearing shoes? You can't have both. Pick one or the other. And that's why a lot of atheists have come to the conclusion that there's no good or evil. And that's a different topic in itself. Okay, the second part of the assumption. Second thing evil assumes is that there is teleology to life. Now, what is teleology? Teleology is a goal, a focus, or an end. It's a purpose to something. Why is this important? Because if there is no God, then there is no teleology to life in the world. That is to say something is done for the sake or goal of something. Okay, let's go into this a little bit. I believe it was Aristotle who differentiated between a final cause and efficient cause. And pretty much, an efficient cause is that for the sake that something happens. A final cause is a goal or purpose. If I boil water, the efficient cause is the water heating up and the gas molecules doing this and that, and it boils. The final cause is so that I could have tea. You with me? When I hit a pool ball to make it into the pocket, the efficient cause is me hitting the ball. The final cause was so that I could make it into the pocket. Let's say I miss it. Well, I still had a final cause in mind, I just didn't achieve it. The efficient cause, hitting the ball, final cause, making it in the pocket, whether I made it or not is irrelevant. I had a purpose, a teleology. Why is this important? Let's take an example. For example, let's take a child who has a disease that causes him to be colorblind. What is a disease? A disease is literally a disorder of structure or function. Now, what does that imply? There's a purpose, a teleology. So, if a child is born with a colorblind disease, you're implying that there's a teleology. What's a teleology? It implies a design by which things ought to function and flourish. Well, if you're saying there's a design, then you are implying there's a designer. So let's backtrack. If something is not working, if I say my phone is bad, I am implying there's a way my phone ought to function, that it's not functioning that way. And I say, well, why do you think your phone should function that way? Well, because that's how T-Mobile made it. So if it is working in a way that it was designed to not work, it is bad and not working properly. If there is no God, life has no function, purpose, or teleology. So if a child is born colorblind, who cares, right? Evolution didn't try to give him eyes that could see color. So if you're telling me that, wait a minute, child is colorblind, you're implying that there's a design to life, a teleology, which implies a function, which implies a designer, which implies God. So evil, in this sense, proves that there is a God. Now, someone might say, well, someone might bring up science, and you say, well, look, science cannot explain or give us final causes. You can't get an ought from an is. If I were to drop dead right now, my heart stopped beating, and someone said, call the ambulance, Eric's heart stopped beating. And you say, well, why? Well, because his heart isn't beating. Okay, so what should beat? Why should it beat? Why do hearts beat to pump blood? I mean, what's the big deal? I mean, according to Darwinian evolution, the only reason my heart pumps, I didn't die. So it's not like hearts pump blood in order to provide life. They pump blood because in the evolutionary scheme of things, the organisms that had hearts that pump blood happened to survive and the other ones didn't. You take away the teleology and strip it. So we don't have eyes to see, we have eyes because it's an evolutionary adaptation. You see how the teleology is being stripped from the perspective. For example, no one's going to go outside and look down at the rock and say, oh my gosh, this rock only has 4 points. Someone called the cops, it should have 5. No one goes to the beach or to the forest or to the woods and say, this boulder, you know what, I don't like how it looks. Something's wrong with it. No one says that. But let's say you get a phone or a guitar and you say, you know what, this isn't working right. How do you know it's not working right? Because you know the design, purpose, or function. You pick up a rock, it doesn't have a specific shape it's supposed to be, it just is. Are you with me? So, if an atheist wants to say that a child being colorblind is evil, then he must assume a final cause and teleology. For example, he must assume that eyes exist for the sake of seeing. But if there is no God, this can't be true. So, to sum it up, evil actually presupposes God exists, and that it assumes, first of all, a lack of objective good, and objectivity can only exist if there is a transcendent grounding, namely God. It assumes a deviation of teleology, which implies that something is not functioning and flourishing the way it was designed to, which means there must be a designer. Therefore, if evil exists, we can deduce that God must exist necessarily. And again, if they want to bring up stuff about God doing stuff in the Old Testament, or this or that happening, then you can just say, well, look, if you're saying something's evil, walk them through it. You're saying there's a design. If you think there's a design, there has to be a designer. There has to be a function. If there is no God, who cares what happens? Nothing was made to look or work a certain way. My heart wasn't made to pump blood. It just so happened that in the evolutionary scheme of things, it pumps blood. And science can't tell me what ought or ought not to be. Science simply tells me what is.